Welcome to episode 3 of ATF, After the Fire, a firefighter line of duty death podcast brought to you by the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation in collaboration with firefighterskills.com. I'm your host, John Nelson. The focus of episode 3 is Phoenix Fire Department's 1984 Toluene explosion that killed HazMat engineer Ricky Pearce and left several other firefighters injured. This was the first line of duty death to be broadcast on television, and it changed not only the ways in which fire departments around the world self-reported fatal and near-miss incidents, but it also changed HazMat and confined space response as we know it today. I have to say that I'm humbled to be in the same room with over 150 years of firefighter experience. We've assembled quite the distinguished and well-connected panel for today's episode. Captain Chris Pearce has served 20 years with the Phoenix Fire Department. He's currently the Special Operations Captain on Battalion 2. Captain Pearce is also the son of the late Phoenix Fire Department HazMat engineer Ricky Pearce, the line of duty death subject of today's episode. Captain Tom Bates served 33 years with the Phoenix Fire Department, ultimately obtaining the rank of Fire Captain. As Spec Ops Programs Manager, he responded to all first alarms or greater and all special operations calls in the Phoenix metropolitan area, assisting command and Spec Ops teams with safety and technical concerns. Captain Bates was Engineer Pearce's captain on the day of the 1984 Toluene explosion. Chief Tom Abbott served with the Tempe Fire Department for over 38 years, ultimately obtaining the rank of Assistant Fire Chief. Since 2014, Chief Abbott has been the Fire Chief of the Fire Medical Department of the City of Surprise, Arizona. Since 1989, Chief Abbott has taught for the International Association of Firefighters and has been involved with over 100 200-hour hazardous material technician classes throughout Arizona. Chief Ron Jamison served 29 years with the Phoenix Fire Department, mostly in special operations, and ultimately obtained the rank of Assistant Fire Chief of Operations. Chief Jamison was a member of the Arizona Task Force 1 since its inception, and is also a longtime member of FEMA and the USNR Rescue Working Group. Chief Jamison is an International Association of Firefighters Master Instructor and has been a HazMat and Confined Space Rescue Instructor for over 30 years. Chief John Tippett is currently the Director of Fire Service Programs at the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, and he has had a career-long interest in firefighter safety. Chief Tippett served 33 years with the Montgomery County, Maryland Fire Department and worked with Charleston, South Carolina as part of that department's recovery from the Sofa Superstore fire of 2007. I'm going to state everyone's name before they speak on the audio of this podcast, just so you can put a name with the voice. However, if you want to go a step deeper, we're going to be posting some video snippets of the actual podcast on firefighterskills.com underneath the tab After the Fire Podcast, Episode 3, and it'll be on the extras page associated with this episode. Without further ado, let us honor the 1984 line of duty death of HazMat engineer Ricky Pearce of the Phoenix Fire Department. First and foremost, thanks everybody for joining us today. We're wondering if you could tell us about Ricky Pearce as a person. Who was he as a father, a friend? Who was he as someone to work with?
Everyone's looking at me, I guess I'll go first.
Ricky Pearce's son and Phoenix Fire Captain, Chris Pearce.
So Ricky was my dad, and I was 6 years old when his incident happened. So just around that day, more than anything, I don't remember a lot of the day around it, but I remember seeing it kind of on the news. I remember people being at the house and knowing something was happening. I don't remember realizing maybe the weight of all of what it was. Again, 6 years old. So, but I remember that. But I remember just the after effects of that. Really, was just a lot of the people around the house and the department, and just the people, as the time went by, still being that family aspect of the department being there and the guys coming by. But the kind of the interesting thing with, I guess, that time frame of it is being 6, being young enough. I find myself fortunate with that I still have a lot of good memories before that with my dad. I have camping trips and hunting and just stuff around the house and life stuff and the things that we talked about with some of the other guys earlier. just as we were catching up with my dad's old Jeep. I remember him, he really liked to, I don't know where he get it, because he didn't pass it on to any of the kids, was his artistic ability. Like, he was a tremendous painter, and he liked doing crafts. Like, he was doing the nail. He was making cabinets using the copper nail pattern stuff. I mean, he made some beautiful stuff. I have not even a lick of carpentry or artistic ability, so I don't, I miss that little piece of it. But I have a lot of good memories from my dad from the time that I'm able to kind of go back to, where I know my sister, so she was a little younger. She was 4 when my dad passed, and she doesn't really have a lot of memories, right? And so that was always a thing that she kind of bothered her through, and still kind of even bothers her a little bit to this day. And so for me, because I have 2 children of my own, when they hit that age, when they turned 6, because now with me being on the job, like, that was a big benchmark for me, because I knew that they would remember. So, yeah. But yeah, I remember, Christmases and birthdays and all that stuff at the firehouse, so I grew up in it, and that kind of really drove me to enjoy it. And I knew how much, from being around these guys, how much my dad loved the job, and it drove me to it, because, what else are you going to do?
And it was good to see him get on the job too. So,
Engineer Ricky Pearce's captain, Tom Bates.
I was on ladder 4 as an engineer, and after I was assigned to the truck, I started studying for captain. And then so as we progressed and stuff, they make you go out and rove as a captain. And so Ricky took my place on ladder 4 as I was out acting. And then when I got made, I give him up my spot, and Ricky got my spot permanently. And so there was always a kind of a bond there, or whatever, that because we'd always talk. He said, "When are you going to give up your spot? When are you going to give up your spot?" Because he was always one of those guys he always wanted to do a good job. You know what I mean? It was just his nature, okay? And he got along with everyone. And the firehouse buffoonery was pretty much always started with him, getting it started and carrying on. And there's things that we probably can't talk about, and we won't. But he was a family man. You know what I mean? He brought his family down on Saturdays and Sundays and stuff like this, and we'd take him up in the bucket, and he was always the first to help everybody else out also, And but when he showed up for work, got his gear on, and if there's a hole to cut, he wanted to cut the hole, okay? And we'll talk a little bit about that particular day, because there's a story behind that before we got there. And but you could always count on Ricky, with the rest of my crew. I had Sobozinski and Bob Arthur. I had a tight crew, when and we could talk to each other, and it was good, It was not fractured, and everybody got along, So he was a good man in my eyes.
During those days, did you need any special prerequisites to get assigned to the HazMat apparatus?
At that time, there was no prerequisites, or there wasn't really a training program other than Bob Moody and Jim Birch. And by then, Jim Birch had left. He retired, and I took his place. But Bob Moody was the one that was still doing the teachings. And he would hang over for C shift, and he'd hang over and come in early for A shift and stuff like this, and give classes and stuff. And so, because we didn't have a HazMat program until I think 86, or the first HazMat technician class. 160 hours or 200 hours, you guys can remember. 120 hours.
We did 120, then we did 160, then we did 200.
That was Fire Chief Tom Abbott.
Right, but then at that time though, it was just he was a firefighter. He's a fire engineer. He got the position, but he wanted to be there. That was one thing. He loved to be there. He loved it. So loved being there.
November 15th, 1984, the day of the incident. Talk to us about leading up to that incident Chief Jamison stated before the podcast that this was before the days of 911. Folks had to call 262-HELP for any emergency aid. Walk us through that day from the generation of the call to how it all unfolded.
Well, that particular day, if I remember right, it was that afternoon we had captain's meetings. Our BC was right across the apparatus floor. We were in meetings there. And I had moved Ricky Pearce up to captain because he was the engineer on the tiller bucket in the tiller. So Bob Arthur was the engineer. Ricky was the engineer in the tiller bucket. So I moved him up. So Bozinski, the firefighter, was the tillerman. They had run a few calls or whatever. And at 3 o'clock, the alarm went off. Well, and I have to talk about the ladder truck. It was a reserve apparatus. And it was an older piece of apparatus where the firefighter rode along the fender well back by the tiller bucket. When the call came in, realizing what it was, my chief said, go ahead and go. He busted me out of the captain's meeting. So I run out there, and they're getting ready to go. And I said, Ricky, I'm here. So I put my stuff back on, and I says, you got to go back in the tiller bucket. Well, Sobel was already in the tiller bucket, so Ricky had to get in that little side seat. He didn't like that. But still, he wanted it. He's the engineer. That's his job. So if I'm making him get out of being the captain, he wants to go back and do his job. But it was kind of funny at that time, you know what I mean? And he was upset because he had to ride and not be able to tiller clear out to 35th Avenue and Broadway.
He liked wheeling.
He liked wheeling. So it was, but he liked he wanted to be a part of everything, I mean, cutting roofs and, the EMS stuff. We drove out there, and it took us, I don't know what time it took us, from when the dispatch or whatever, if we can figure that out, and when we got on the scene, but it's quite a ways out there. And so we get there, and on the way, I'd asked for Rescue 3, I think it was. That was part of our HazMat team, the medical component, because we didn't have paramedics on Engine 4 or Ladder 4. And so, from what I remember, we did that on the radio and everything. And we got there, and when we pulled up, I reported Ladder 4's on the scene, and that's when Bob Moody had told me to get the K-12 out.
Who all was already there when you guys showed up?
Engine 4, Engine 39, Rescue 3.
And then other agencies as well, right?
That other agency, but they're a two-man operation, and I'm not making light of that, but I mean, they weren't part of the operation. And I know Fire Command says that they were and all that, but I don't remember them being part of the operation. So, and we parked out front of the building, right off of Broadway, and Moots, Engine 4 captain, told me to bring up the K-12. And so because we were in a reserve apparatus, we don't always get all of the equipment off of the truck. Okay. So, but when we got off, Ricky and is there getting the K-12 put together, and Bob and Sobel, and we carry it with a carbide tip blade on, just for cutting roofs and everything. And so you can see in the transcript there that I said something about, what kind of metal is this or whatever, because I was going to try to use the carbide tip on that if I could make that happen. But because we were having trouble getting that one off and getting our abrasive blade on. But then we got it on and went up there, and I talked to Moots about I says, we're going to cut on this tank. And he says, yeah, I want to make a cut right here. And he showed, everything that he wanted and everything. And so I said, well, no, let's go in the top. And he goes, no. He says, we're not putting anybody in the top. It's too small. And I was probably the smallest guy there, and I wasn't as big as I am today. And I said, come on, we'll just drop me down inside there. But we didn't have tripod. We didn't have, it was going to be a hand rope deal. And he says, no, we're not doing that. There was not really a long conversation at that point.
Was SCBA your all's only option for respiratory protection at that time?
Yes.
Okay.
But because we had the support truck there, we did have confined space or remote air. that we could have set up on top of that. But to try to set up on a 10-foot diameter domed type operation, it would have been pretty tough. Okay.
No doubt.
And then it would have been pretty tough to try to pull somebody hand over hand with a rope.
That'd be an exhaustive operation today.
Yeah.
You know, that was the conversation at that point, and we started cutting. We started making our cuts, and I don't remember I think at the time, I think Sobozinski had already made one cut. Big Bob Arthur had, and maybe Ricky had already made a cut. I'm not sure how that process exactly went, but we had made 2 cuts and started our cross cut.
So, but the idea was this was a rescue because they believed that the person who had fallen down in the worker who had fallen down in the tank was still viable, still
Right.
alive.
When we got there, Ladder 4, the reports were that they were seeing him move down there, that he was moving around.
The guys on top of the tank had seen him? Okay.
Right. Is the report that I was getting.
Not our guys, no. The RP's guys. The responsible parties guys.
No, Engine 39's guys.
Oh, he's 39?
I'm almost positive, but I mean, it was because they weren't up on the top at that time.
Is there any indication in the dispatch transcript that folks believed there was a live victim?
There is conversation that they're dealing with a live victim,
Chief John Tippett from the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation.
that the victim is they're still in rescue mode, but they didn't use that kind of terminology. Gotcha. I guess there's talk in the transcript that they could see the guy moving or he was mumbling or something to that effect.
You know, and so as far as we knew, it was a rescue operation, and we started our cuts. And I know at the time of at different times we had the water going on the bottom, and we had the crews up on the top, and that was all done by Captain Moody on Engine 4. He had set up the operation as to what he wanted done, and command called me back to the command post right whenever the explosion took place. I went back to the command post, talked to them, came back, and then he called me back again, and that's when the explosion took place. Because I was on my way back whenever it happened, and I turned around and got back over to where the explosion had taken place. And at that time, there was chaos.
How many people were directly in what we would now deem as the hot zone?
Basically, everybody was there except for the guy on top. Everybody in those crews was in the hot zone, according to the video.
That was Chief Ron Jamison.
And Moots I don't think he was part of the explosion. I think he was off to the side. He was directing and making stuff happen. Like I said, I was towards had went to the command post because they called me away from it. And
the decision was made to do the rescue. We thought there was a viable victim inside of the tank. And then a decision was made to put a line on the top of the tank. And then there was a decision made to put a line directed at the saw. The reasoning behind both of those was to cut down on the spark of the
Cut down
K-12?
on the sparks and the chance for an explosion, to ignition.
Was the saw able to penetrate all the way through? They had almost complete. So that part of the report.
It's in there. It shows that I think there was a cut on the left-hand side, right-hand side, and they were making the cut across the top.
Yeah, they'd almost completed the
From what I remember, there was 3 cuts made. I know that. So.
There's 3 cuts made, and then the flap came out at an angle. That angle directed that energy towards where Ricky was standing.
And Ricky was backing up
Sobo.
Bob Arthur, because he hurt his hands and stuff. I remember him having a saw, and it took the saw and slammed it up, I guess, against the.
So Ricky wasn't the saw man; he was the guy.
Not at that time. He had already made some cuts and stuff, and because they were rotating. It was a very hard cut.
It's a K-12, 1984 K-12, right? No one can hold that thing out there for 20 minutes.
I think Bob was standing here and Ricky was to his left.
And they weren't actually cutting at the time of the explosion, right? It looked like they were kind of getting in position. I don't know. It looked like, or maybe the hose guy with the hose was getting repositioned
The hose guy moved the line to put the fire out, the little brush fire out, which, captures your attention in that part of the video. You look at it, as soon as he moved it, the explosion happened.
The video footage we keep talking about can be found at firefighterskills.com under the After the Fire podcast tab, episode 3, extras. And then the decision to take the line off the top, what was the thought process behind that? To pull those guys down from the top? If you can speak to that.
I can't speak to that because it was a sector officer or someone running around the area that pulled them off, and I don't know exactly why.
His mental aspect, from my perspective, was he didn't think they should be using a hand line in a vent hole. Right, operating. Hey, we don't run hose lines into vent holes and order them off. Right, outside of the order model.
So kind of what we're looking at here is an event that doesn't quite fit the mold of what we encounter on a day-to-day basis. So we're trying to fit our best known practices to try to make it work.
And they don't really fit.
And they don't really fit, but it's the closest thing we can come to. The work that that's been done with some of the the other elements of critical decision making are, if we're trying to resolve an issue, by nature we become the problem solvers. So by nature we're going to use the best of what we can to figure out to do, even though it doesn't fit well or it's not working. And because it doesn't go wrong right away, we think we're going down the right path. And that doesn't, that plays through in this event as well as just about every other event where firefighters lose their lives before and since. Dawn Castillo, the injury epidemiologist that heads NIOSH, has said that one of the issues in NIOSH reports is that they do say the same thing because it's usually the same set of circumstances where firefighters are trying to do what they think is the right thing to do. They don't typically put themselves at risk because they're going to put themselves into a casket. Their mindset is, I'm trying to fix this to the best of my ability. And looking through the transcript last night, which Tom, we really appreciate you sharing, you can see that communication breaking down almost right from the call between the police dispatcher and the fire dispatcher. They don't really know what's in the tank. They think it's petroleum. Yes, it's petroleum. Well, that's a far cry from toluene. Yeah, it's in the same family, but there's some major differences there. So part of our aspect here is to not only honor Ricky's sacrifice, but also talk a lot about what came after that was so important about what happened there. And again, we can't thank all of you enough for being here today to share that with us.
One of the things you need to think about too, number one, obviously we've talked about the fact that it was 35 years ago, but this is also at the time that facility was in a county island, and in Arizona there's not a single county that has a county fire department, and so it was contract basis with a private company to provide service. And so that call was initially turned over to that agency, that entity. They responded, and however long it took them to get there from, imagine they probably came out of Levine to get there. And then, so once they got there and recognized the fact that this was out of their capabilities, they requested mutual aid. So that has to go back through their dispatch center over back to the Phoenix Fire Dispatch Center. Then the shift commander had to approve the request for mutual aid. Then that dispatch took place. So you've got an elapsed time there that put everybody behind the 8 ball just to begin with in the length of time.
And not to get off on a tangent, but just to clarify, can you explain exactly what mutual aid is versus automatic aid versus normal response?
Well, our system is automatic aid, and
now it's automatic aid.
Today, well, and even at that time, at that time
Okay.
we had automatic aid, and there was no city boundaries for Phoenix, Glendale, and Tempe.
For those 3 cities.
For those 3 cities.
Right, and mutual aid was an agency would have to request assistance. Something was beyond their capabilities, whether it's from a resource equipment or physical resource or people, whatever skills they had. And then the chief would have to approve going outside the city limits to assist with another agency. And then I don't think we ever have turned down a mutual aid request that I know of, but we've always done that. But within the automatic aid system, Phoenix Fire Regional Dispatch Center was dispatching for Glendale, Phoenix, and Tempe at that time. And we had no city boundaries.
So irrespective of boundary lines or truck color or what city it was, the closest computer picks the closest unit and sends it.
Right. So when you say this was an island, though, this would have been a facility where Phoenix Fire wouldn't have pre-planned or done anything with, because it was outside of the automatic aid group.
Yeah, they didn't have jurisdiction.
Right.
So fire prevention never showed up.
Right.
Didn't know the facility really existed. Well, you might have known it by driving past it, but it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't our responsibility or Phoenix's responsibility.
This question's open to everybody. How did the Phoenix Fire Department initially react to this incident? And what did they learn from it? And then how did they grow from it? Where did the fire department go after this incident?
From what I remember, okay, because it was after that happened. I mean, they relieved me of because I was extrication sector. When that happened, even though I wasn't hurt, they said, here, someone's going to take your spot. You got to leave. You got to go to the hospital. And I think I went to the hospital, and then, but the doctors didn't take, I wasn't a patient, I guess.
Were you injured?
No.
Before you get into that, how many guys did actually get injured on scene?
I don't have a number.
In here, stage 6, I would think that number probably is a couple more than that, right? At least initially.
Yeah.
Initially they were still trying to work and still trying to do self-rescue operations, but they were all, partially death at the time. They were burnt. They ended up going to the burn unit. Some of them were hurt pretty severely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of guys, sometimes we get kind of prideful and we don't want to mention our injury.
Right.
So how many guys were actually hurt that didn't say anything?
Yeah.
Right, and the same thing with that too is that I know the department offered us up some counseling and stuff like that, but I'm okay. You know what I mean? And it's hard.
Different world, right?
It's hard to say you need help, and I probably fit into that group. That I'll be okay. I'll go back to the station. Well, I think I went home at 8 o'clock that night. I went back to the station, and then they said, you're relieved. We got crews here, blah, 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 And so, and I know the next day there was probably and I can't remember exactly. I don't know how we would even figure that out today. But I didn't know what to do. Okay. And I don't know if I need to share what, I got up the next morning and I went to Ricky's house. I called him up and I said, I need to come and talk to you. And I don't remember how I got the phone number. I don't remember how that all laid out exactly. I do remember driving to Ricky's house and sitting down with Chris and Kimberly and Ricky's mom and dad. And I don't know how they exactly got there, or if they've heard, if they flew in that night, or exactly the story behind that. But I sat down and I told them what happened, because I thought that's what needed to happen. The fire department didn't tell me to do that. I just took it upon myself to do that. And told them, they asked questions, and I left. I don't know if that's the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do, but I thought it was, at that time, I thought it was the right thing to do so that they wouldn't hear things, that they would know exactly what took place from me, and not to try to hide anything. Because I know how some of these things, they don't want to tell the story or whatever. And then I drove back home, but I know the fire department had classes or had meetings to where we could talk about things, but most of that was, we're okay. And then you had to deal with the funeral and that type stuff.
Chris, how did your family react to the visit from Captain Bates?
So again, that's kind of a better question for my mom, because again, with so much being 6 years old and so much going on, I don't remember the specifics of the visit, but what I do remember is that always knowing what happened, and so the ability to kind of have that, I don't know, it's something that I've carried with me, and so it's a lot of essentially how I've been able to speak on my dad's incidents throughout the years and have that experience. So just having that knowledge and knowing, even that if I don't remember the conversation with him, but having the conversations later with my mom, I know that knowledge has been appreciative to me, just because it is very confusing. There's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of moving parts in there. And the fact that here we are 35 years later, and you look at the transcripts, you look at the stuff that we're talking about here today, like the story that these guys are talking about today is the same story that I've known my entire life. And so there's something to that. There's something to kind of lay back on that. And then as, especially as the next pieces of it go with the funeral, which again, you got to remember, when my dad passed, my mom's 29 years old. My dad was 32. So still relatively young couple, with young kids at home. So that's a big, change in the whole life perspective and things like that. So I ended up, and my sister didn't go to the funeral. We stayed at home, just because, we have had a very, very good history. We've been a very lucky department that we don't lose a lot of members. And so she was trying to save us from the media frenzy of the 1980s, which I couldn't even imagine would be now in the modern era. But it was, like, you've watched the footage of the funerals and stuff like that, it was unimpeded access to, of the media there. So, being protected from that, I think I'm really very appreciative of my mom's decisions at that time, and then, just the support of these guys, not just then, but for forever.
And speaking of support, how were you supported? How were other guys supported by the department at the time immediately after the accident? You mentioned the counseling was offered.
I don't remember that I think it was available but when you turn it down, they're not going to keep coming back at you. They leave us alone,
We look at the development of, mental health support for firefighters in that timeline. It was very, very minimal, right? Hey, something really horrible happened. What can we do for you? And the answer, 99 times out of 100 of you, hey, I'm fine.
Go back to the station and go to work. That's what I did. I didn't take a long, extended period of time off or anything like that. You go back and go to work. But I don't know if that's right. You know what I mean? I don't know if that's exactly the way it's supposed to happen, but that's what I did.
That's what we always did, no matter what happened. When you had that kind of any kind of an incident, the next day you're back on shift.
Really, the Big Bob's about the only guy that left, right?
Yes.
He left,
Big.
He left at 22 pretty quick.
Right.
And again, I don't think, even though with all these years later, right, with all the stuff now, I'm going to tell you that 85 to 90% of the guys now are going to do the same thing.
Right.
That's what.
We have tremendous mental health resources now that we didn't have back then, right? So they're confidential. So we don't know a lot about them, but we do know that they're used a lot. And they never would have been back then. I mean, even if all those resources were available back in '84, no one would have used them because it would have seemed unmanly.
Weakness.
Yeah.
But but in that same token, I probably needed help.
Sure.
Because I've been, you blame yourself for the whole thing. And I understand what you said last night. It's not your, why are you picking up that baggage? Well, he was on my truck.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, exactly.
And you just still live with it and still live with it. you move on.
Cap, you went back to work because it's what you did, and it's what people were expected to do. But there's also something to be said for what was the resilience that allowed you to go on with your career, and then where you went after that. So you go back to work, you go in the company for a while. What happens next? Tell us about the rest of your career, because you didn't resign from the Phoenix Fire Department. You worked the rest of a full career there.
Yeah, stayed on Ladder 4 and stayed on the HazMat team that was there and went through the trainings and stuff. And it was hard to get a replacement for Ricky. And that people wanted to be on the team, but didn't want to say I took Ricky's place. Mm-hmm. And I had good friends. I mean, hey, I want to come over there, but I mean, and I finally got Nick Petrucci, had been on A shift at Station 4, and he came over and fit in real well with the crews and stuff like that. And I mean, I couldn't offer him up anything as far as, tell him the story of what happened and tell him what we do and keep going. And, I had Bob Moody there as the captain on Engine 4, and people came back. And we had a lot of rovers, but that would show up, and we kept going to HazMat calls, just kept trucking along. 1986, I think it was, 87, I went into the special operations as a 40-hour work week to promote and be the HazMat training coordinator, to keep that going and make sure that we were doing the right things. And that's when, I'm not exactly sure, I think Chief Abbott was part of the putting together the 120-hour class.
Yeah, I came over, I think it was 1988 or late 87, and worked there. We worked for Van Zandt for a little while, and Chief Stormont was a captain at that time and was promoted when Chief Van Zandt retired. And then we wound up working for him for a couple of years out of the office.
And we just, started doing stuff with A-level suits. I did burn tests for the NFPA, I think it was. We were burning A-level suits to figure out what it was going to be like if you were in a flash fire, and that helped promote the flash protection and stuff like that. And I did that through Stormont, Chief Stormont.
A lot of R&D. We fired up HazMat training on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. So if you were working once a week, you were going to 3 hours of HazMat training. And that was through the whole automatic gate system, because Tempe and Glendale were coming to that also. Mm-hmm. That was all triggered from this event, right? That started that ball rolling. Then R&D was, Chief Stormont was a big advocate of going out and getting information from wherever you could to make us better.
So the Phoenix Fire Department reaction to the incident was, we want to recover from this. We want to make sure that this doesn't happen again to the best of our ability. Because I know from the outside, I was a company officer east, as far east as you can get from here. And when this event came into our fire department, it was transitional. It was something, first of all, the discussion at the fire department kitchen table was, wow, I can't believe they're so candid and open about this. And then second, it set the tone and the pace for establishing or upping the game of our HazMat team and special operations.
But we also, too, went out looking for stuff. The Chicago Fire Department's HazMat team, the New York Fire Department HazMat team. We called in special people to give us classes and stuff like that.
Subject matter experts. We get subject matter experts to come in.
Bill Hand, I think, out of Houston. It was one, and they would come in, and we hired
Steve
Maslansky. We hired people to teach us. There was a guy, the HazCat kits out of
Bob
Gray,
Turkington
and Chief Gray. Mm-hmm. We
Jerry
brought
Gray.
those people in to teach us stuff, and we just went hog wild on trying to get stuff to make us better.
And all that was brand new. Hardly anybody was doing it.
Right.
So HazCat was brand new.
Go to Colorado Springs on compressed gas seminars, and it was all
PIDs were brand new.
to bring that back so we could teach our guys this is what this is all about.
And what's a PID?
Photo ionization detector.
That was brand new technology, and that's when we brought Steve Maslansky in to teach us on how to interpret the HNU.
The HNU was that first photo ionization detector.
And so it just progressed from that, and and I stayed busy doing that, and just I didn't know to quit. Maybe that's stupidity on my part, but that wasn't what was supposed to happen. I was supposed to keep going on and learn and make our fire department better, because we looked at it as the HazMat team is supposed to be the paramedics for firefighters. The paramedics are out there because that's the next level, and for the customer out there, the HazMat team is for the firemen that don't know that doesn't have the expertise to handle those situations. So it's just that next level up to where you can, so that we're not killing more people or hurting more people, and that's the way we looked at it. Not necessarily it was for the citizens, but it was really to protect our firefighters.
Did you guys bring in these other neighboring agencies that you ran a lot of the automatic aid with into these trainings? Were they receptive? Did you start doing more pre-planning for facilities in the outskirts of town and things like that?
Yes.
Yep.
Because we were the HazMat team for the metropolitan area was Station 4, and then we added Rescue 3 and Engine 18 for the paramedic side of it. So when A-level entries and stuff, we could do baselines and have medics on the scene.
Tox medics.
Tox medics. And they went through toxicology classes and stuff like that for chemicals.
And that was pre-1984. This was pre the incident. That was what was going on then.
Right. And so then we added Station 38, and then Tempe come on board. They seen what was going on, and because we were running a lot of calls in Tempe, we were running a lot of. We'd get there with Ricky and stuff. We'd get there at the station and put our gear on, and we might not see the station until 10, 11 o'clock that night, because we would run HazMat call after HazMat call all over the city.
All over the region.
Right, And so they seen that they needed to do that. Tempe, Glendale. And then, then everybody else, Mesa got on board. I'm not exactly sure when Mesa come on board. They had their own team and all that. But they weren't part of our organization. And then, we lose, and I'm not sure, remember the numbers, the 472. When did that come out? 472 is the
that was
your guidelines
late.
for.
That was late 80s, because you got to remember when this incident took place, 1910-120, 29 CFR 1910-120.
Respiratory standard.
And 136 or 134, the respiratory standard, 146, the confined space standard. None of that existed. And that was 1986 is when the OSHA released 1910-120 for hazardous materials response. So all this took place prior to that even existing. 472 didn't come along till the end of the 1980s for your minimum qualifications and standards. So,
But that made it easy as a HazMat training coordinator to see what training you needed to do and keep up on annual basis and all that type of stuff. So that it was a guideline for us, which was tremendous, So,
This incident helped change the way that we view the hot zone. We didn't have a risk management profile back then, right? We would risk everything on every call, pretty much. We saved everybody. It didn't matter if they were a recovery or if they were a viable patient. There was only one model, and that's go, 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 and get them out.
even the paramedics didn't have the authority to declare somebody dead. Even though you could look at a monitor and say, no, this person's dead. You worked them until you got to the hospital and let a doctor do it. And that's just the way it was. Unless it was an obvious decapitation, everybody was a patient, and everybody was somebody you would rescue.
The hot zone, we talk about the number of people that are in the hot zone. We weren't referring to it as the hot zone at the time, but on this call there was a large number of people in the immediate area where the explosion took place. And this call and other calls like it around the nation drove us to develop the risk management profile, where we risk our lives in a calculated manner to save savable lives. We risk our lives a little to save property, and we won't risk our lives at all to save property or lives that are already lost. That didn't exist in '84, and it grew out of this incident and other incidents. Today, if we had to make a cut, or if we were going to do something in the hazard area, there'd be 2 people in that exposure area, not 8 or 6. Right.
Or more.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So these are changes that were driven by and I can't say they're just this incident, but this incident and other ones like this. These things help modify the fire service, and a part of that, and this I will say, is part of that is because we were forthright, and Alan Brunacini and the union president at the time, Pat Cantelmi, were basically advocates of getting the information out there and sharing it, and saying, even though it looks bad, right? We did something bad. The outcome was bad, with the right intentions, but the outcome was bad. But here's what we did, and we don't want you to do it. And so we, as you spoke to, it changes your perspective when you see that. So,
speaking of the self-reporting part from Phoenix, what do you think prompted Phoenix to be so transparent about this particular issue? And then how did self-reporting grow and, I guess, become more refined? Even Billy Goldfeder wrote that the LODD was different. It was not only an unusual and tragic loss. He's talking about this LODD was different. It was not only an unusual and tragic loss that was caught on film, but it was also talked about by the PFD. The PFD was aggressively sharing the facts of what went right and especially what went horribly wrong. Why did you guys decide to become so transparent, if you can?
Well, that's got to be the fire chief and a bigger advocate of firefighter safety there's never been. Right, and he's like, let's get that message out there. Let's show them what not to do, on top of what to do. So I'm going to go with Pat Cantelmi and Alan Brunacini as being the driving forces behind that, firefighter safety.
This was really the first LODD that kind of put it out there and said, we messed up. This is why. This is what we did right. This is what we did wrong.
Well, they say it captured on video. That was our videographer. That was the Phoenix Fire Department videographer shooting the video.
That wasn't the news or anything?
No, that was,
wow.
Yeah. So the air footage was the news helicopter, but the ground footage was a Phoenix Fire Department videographer. This section we're sitting in existed for the Phoenix Fire Department, I think, before probably one of the first ones in the nation. We had our own ability to shoot and edit video and do training. If this incident would have been successful, that might have been a training video on how to do it.
Yeah, this was the first event that I could remember in my career where it was more than just a firefighter was killed and here's the maybe a little news clip and then the funeral. This one went beyond that. This one had a story behind it that told what took place. And it wasn't just about everything that went wrong. It was also about the story of recovery. It was the story of, we don't want you to do this the same way, but I think, Ron, you're right when you say that if it had gone well, it could have been a model for a future event. But there was an analysis conducted here that said, maybe there's some things we should rethink here. Like you're questioning, Tom, of, well, do you really want this? Do you really want this guy to come off the route? Why are we doing that? Or can't we just drop somebody in the hole? And that commander's decision, we're not doing that. It goes into the whole crew resource management model of, well, maybe as a supervisor, you need to listen to what people are asking you because they may have an insight that you're not taking into account. Whatever that commander's mindset was about not putting somebody else in the hole, he's not here to explain his portion of it, but he made the decision, no, we're not going to put anybody in the hole. But, and you, like you said, Chris, maybe it was because it would be difficult. Maybe it was because it was going to be too hard. Maybe he just didn't think. It was already one person down there that was out. He didn't want to risk any of his people's lives, but even before it's the risk, the organizational model. I think all of those things play here. And had it not been for the transparency of the Phoenix Fire Department, this event would have gone into the annals as a lot of the others had, where the department would have just suppressed it. We had a terrible thing happen. Don't anybody talk about it. Let's move on. But this revolutionized fire departments' approaches all across the country to how they looked at events that didn't turn out with an outcome that they had anticipated. So.
Absolutely, and I guess especially for me personally, when you look at this incident and the way that what these guys did after the fact and what the department did, and how that impacted, nationally, and really what the kind of grew from this, especially from my perspective, is that we're all in that same race to passing away, right? It's that is what it is, and so people die for a number of reasons, some good reasons, some good, bad, whatever. But the fact that my father had this incident, was involved in this thing, passed away, and then now, as we move forward from that, for me, my dad died for something, right? Because we're having this conversation, and it's been a national conversation then. It was a national conversation 35 years ago, and we're still talking about it now of, hey, these are the lessons that we started to learn there. This is where we need to change these things. And so in my mind, what these guys did after my father's incident saved a lot of other people's lives. Because as you talked about, different day, different time, different city may have had this same incident and have it go a very similar way, and then no one knows about it. Like it just happened, it was tragic, and they held it inside. But for me, knowing that and growing up around the fire service, that's one of the things that's made me most proud about my father's incident, is just knowing that something good has come out of it.
I want to point out that this was a HazMat call, right? It was a confined space rescue call, which are HazMat calls with a technical rescue component. But the HazMat team was functioning as a rescue team, not as the HazMat team. They weren't doing their normal HazMat stuff. They got there and they got assigned to do extrication, and they were functioning like a rescue team. They weren't using meters. They weren't doing the things that the HazMat team would do. And at that time, there was no such thing as a confined space rescue team in the fire service, as far as I know. And we didn't get ours until 1992. We stood up our first confined space rescue team.
Which was still a year prior to the OSHA regulations you were talking about, right? It's 93 or so.
But we did have, and I said that earlier, we did have remote air. We had those on our trucks to where we could set up, but you could only go 150 feet. Remember, I talked about the tunnel incident at 47th and McDowell when they was putting I-10 in. We set up, we put air monitoring on for those guys to figure out what was going on, and it was carbon monoxide that the guy had went down with. But we set it up like a HazMat call. On this particular call with Ricky, if, looking back.
The same year, right?
Oh, it was the same year. And if we would have set it up like a HazMat call, there would be the tape, putting people in there, taking meter readings, ciphering out what was going on before you started the operation. You would have probably figured out that there wasn't enough oxygen down in the tank for anybody to live.
The material's 3 times heavier than air. Toluene is molecular weight's 92, air's 29.
And we had we had meters that you could drop the hose down inside there and get it taken care of.
Because of the way they were assigned, it didn't happen.
And the focus was on rescue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we just saw a move is the key, right?
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit last night when we were having dinner. I want to just go back just a second to the psychology of going from everybody's a victim, everybody's viable, to now we make this decision. What changes psychologically for the fire department?
It takes the heat off. Basically, psychologically, you have time to make a decision. Where if you're going after a live victim, you're saying, hey, if we don't get there in 4 minutes or 6 minutes, they're going to have brain death, and we have to hustle. We got to go. So if you're saying, hey, we think this is a recovery, right? Everybody takes a step back. We still do the things that we're going to do. We just do it more calm, and there's no emotion involved. It's more professional. It works out. I can't even say how much slower we'd be, because just taking a step back, it makes you're more efficient when you're not trying to hurry, right?
Right. We touched on the immediate evolution of the Phoenix Fire Department following this incident. Now, over 35 years later, where is the Phoenix Fire Department on hazardous material and confined space rescue?
And so really the thing that we have now with within the special operations is we do really look at these things as a combination of not just a hazardous material call, but also that technical rescue aspect of it. And so we have a couple of, we bring those things together as much as we can, and we also have some members that are dual tech that are specialized in both pieces of it. So really the confined space, that's really that area that they excel in. So we'll put those groups forward so that when you're looking at that hot zone, especially on a confined space rescue, that we're putting people that just don't know how to run the ropes on it or just know how to run the meters, that they're able to do all that, because that tip of the spear of those incidents is where we're going to get somebody hurt. And so having the most knowledge, the most ability to be in that forward position. And then, so I think, again, the biggest thing, you go all the way back to my dad's incident that we still use today, is they call it the HazMat huddle, which is, hey, you get right to everything's moving, stop for just a couple of extra seconds. Hey, let's take a second, let's look at everything we're about to do, make sure everyone's on board, because the biggest thing is what you don't want to have is communication breakdown in any of these incidents. So you just, even though you think you've got the plan in your head as a company officer and as a command officer, you're pushing that thing forward, you got to make sure that the people that are actually going to go forward and put themselves in the danger have a clear idea of what their objectives are and what your expectations are of, hey, this is how far we're hoping you get. And so again, that mindset within the fire service is that I'm going to go in that hole and I'm going to go get them. Well, so now we've kind of moved a little bit away from that mindset of, hey, you're going to go in there. Your job is to make contact, because especially if you get into a larger, complex, confined space, just getting to where they are is going to be the first piece of it. And then getting them in the rest work cycle stuff of, hey, you might just be getting there to find them, start some basic packaging, and then you're going to come out. And then we're going to set the next team in to help move that rescue along. So that's just, more than anything, we've slowed down the process, and then we've really focused on getting the right specialties in the right positions.
Increased efficiency through each person being trained more.
Absolutely, and to my mindset, I think that's having those people that have the most amount of knowledge is one of the most important pieces of all this, and that came from everything these guys built.
And is there a portion or a built-in temperature check? Are we still on the right path? Is
Yes.
anybody seeing something that maybe we missed originally?
On big calls, our basically our shift commander comes in and challenges the plan, right? So we say, hey, what's the plan? This is the guy that's going to come in, and it doesn't matter if it's a big fire or if it's a technical call or a confined space call or a HazMat call. He's going to come in and say, are we still in the right, strategy? Because that's the thing, especially when we get task oriented, we start doing a task, and we will do that task until that task is complete. So if someone doesn't come in and say, are we still in the correct strategy? Right? This building's been burning for 40 minutes. Buildings don't burn for 40 minutes without something happening, right? Are we still in the right strategy?
And that's what we built in with the 40-hour work week HazMat manager. The HazMat, I wouldn't really call it a manager. I ran the HazMat program. Is car 115. And then during the day, I would respond to calls to assist in technical with command so that the hazard sector could do their job. I would sit over there with hazard sector. We'd come up with a plan. I have to go talk to command officers, let them know what was going on, and make them buy in, you know what I mean? Answer all their questions. Yeah. And if they were okay with it, we started the operation. Most of the time we started the operation, and if he wanted to stop it, then he would. As we progressed, we put a guy on 24-hour shift work.
Each shift had
a car 957,
which was a special operations responder.
We responded to all HazMat calls, all TRT calls, all first alarm and greater, because on those type calls, you became the safety officer, and you'd set up safety sector, and you'd give them information about the building, collapse zones, blah, blah, and you'd take care of those things.
And that's separate from the FIT now, right?
Yeah.
All right.
So yes, so now we have the two 957s, the north and the south. And then also we've added our Battalion 2, which is our kind of our furthest west fire, Phoenix Battalion is now a TRT HazMat chief with that specialty in their FIT that's also has those specialties. And then Battalion 2, which is where I'm at now, which is the same thing. So now we have the captains that have that capabilities on the 957s to go be specialties, and then those two chiefs essentially split the city. And then, so a lot of times when your 957 will get on scene and they'll be the safety officer for that operation, and then the chief will become the hazard sector or the rescue technical sector, so that the command is able to talk to them, but you've just added those extra layers of knowledge to assist the overall command officers.
One of the problems we face on special operations calls is you have subject matter experts or highly trained individuals, and the command officers aren't in that group, and they're managing the call. So we would send a liaison, car 957, the special operations responder would go talk to command and say, here's what the HazMat team's going to do, here's what the TRT team's going to do. And he would explain it to him and put that incident commander at ease because he doesn't know the terminology we're using. So one of the ways we fix that is special operations battalions, those command officers are special operations individuals. They've been trained, they come up in the system, and they grew up and they were firefighters, they got trained, and then they became captains, and they got promoted to battalion chief. And so now, if you're assigned to one of those, you're a special operations member. So that explanation is so much easier, right? They know what you're doing and why.
Everybody speaking the same language.
Yeah, it's safer, right? The FITs that we have, all the drivers, the field incident technicians, the drivers for the command officers, which most places aren't lucky enough to have, on big calls they are assigned to a sector or a division or group for the rest of the world, right? They assume safety for that, and so they fire up a second radio channel. So when we're operating on a big fire, we have the operations channel, and we also have a safety radio channel that we can get in the back door and free up communications. It works really, really well. That combined with the way that we manage on deck and manage our resources, I think improved our safety phenomenally. And I don't think there's too many people that can exceed that nationwide.
And it's almost like, why do you have command now? Because he's sitting there, unless it's a big operation, you have a chief that's in charge of that sector. They're making the decisions. He's okay in the position. Then he's going to tell command. Command sometimes sits there on technical rescue calls or whatever. They might as well pack it up and go home because they're really not making any decisions.
The resource allocation. That sounds bad. It sounds bad, right? But it makes them mad a little bit. Yeah, but you're going.
It hurts some feelings,
we got to get our SMEs in here, our subject matter experts.
Yeah, but if the commander is really worth his salt, he knows what his resources are capable of, and he lets them do their work.
Yes.
Which was going to lead me to the question for Chris today. In today's environment, what happens when you challenge up? What happens as a captain if you see something that doesn't look right and you go to the next level and you say, I don't have a good feeling about this?
Well, I tell you what. So I've been very lucky to have in my time at Station 12, which is a special operations mountain rescue, that a lot of times, though, we have those conversations, and a lot of times how those conversations go, especially now in the day and age of using helicopters and things like that, we will even on the mountain stop on the mountain for a second and use the additional technology that we have, which is cell phones. And me and my chief will have conversations, and we'll bounce stuff back off each other of, hey, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm thinking. And so a lot of times within our world, it's, hey, I'm trying to push for this. And so it's hard to have a long conversation over radio, especially because on a lot of like fire scenes, and you can maybe pull back out and go and talk to your chief in the window. Well, when we're out on the side of the mountain, like those conversations just don't happen that way. So we use the technology that we have. I've had a really good luck of having some back and forth of, if anything, it's usually they're trying to do it with maybe the lowest level of resources or technology available to us. And then I'm usually pushing for a higher level of, hey, we're doing this because, again, here in the valley, with any of these calls any day of the year, when it's 115 degrees outside, it changes some of our longer term, rest work cycles, and especially with us on the mountain, like we're in it till the end. Like it's really hard to do rest work cycles on the side of the mountain because you're not getting out of it, and you just can't keep throwing resources hiking up the mountain and trying to get other people. It doesn't work the same way.
Our HazMat huddle, when we do when we call it the HazMat huddle, and we use it in TRT, technical rescue also, but during that thing, so if Tommy was that guy and he was spearheading that conversation, he said, here's the mission assignments, this is what they are, this is what we're going to do if there's a problem, and does everybody agree with that? And anybody in that group, doesn't mean a firefighter, engineer, captain, anybody in that group can say, wait, I have a problem, and we'll talk through it. And it's usually really quick. They're going, hey, are you sure we're in the right suit? Yeah, here's the data from research, here's this, here's that, whatever the question is. But there is an open forum for you being able to say, I'm not comfortable with that, and I've seen it done.
And again, it's, yeah, the biggest thing with it, and the most important part of it is that we've really tried to instill within our members that challenging the plan at any level isn't wrong. Because you as a good command officer, you as a good company officer, should be able to justify your decisions pretty quickly. And if you can't, if you're struggling to do that, well, then that guy might be in the right. And
we don't do that in fires, obviously.
Yeah.
Right. Fires is a super dynamic situation and super time dependent. Mountain rescues can take serious long time. HazMat calls are long, extended operations. Right. There's time to have conversation, so we can do that. We don't have a democracy when it comes to the command officer gives orders and work is done. Sure. But on these situations, when we have these briefings, there's a time for input.
And and as Car 957 or your safety officer or whatever, I was always, what doesn't look right here? What did I miss here? And then I fixed it. And that's what you have to do. If you start a process and then you go, oh, dang, we forgot to do this, you have to fix it.
If you want to fix it with firefighters, we're professional helpers. Right. So when we're safety officers and we had a problem, this engine company is too close to this wall, it's going to fall on them and crush them. Right. You'd walk up to me and say, hey, guys, I need a favor. I need you to back up like 30 feet. Otherwise, when this wall falls on you and smashes you, I'm going to have to do all kinds of paperwork. It's going to be a mess. Right. So do me a favor and back. And if you ask them that way, if you ask firefighters for help, they will help you. If you yell at them and scream at them and stuff, they don't like that. Adults don't like getting yelled at. When I went to special operations, Tommy was already there, and we grew up in the safety officer. We established that. We had some challenges. We got through it. It was really good. But in '89, we put on a class for the International Association of Firefighters. We did the first ever confined space rescue class for them, ahead of the standard. So in '89, they started doing that, and they're still teaching that to this day. That's how I personally got involved with being an instructor for the International Association of Firefighters. But that first class, we took the Ricky Pearce video to New Jersey, and we showed it in front of 200 captains in New Jersey, and it was interesting because they're pretty frank. Back on the East Coast, they tell you what they think, and as soon as they saw that torch fire up in the video, they were into us pretty hard, and we're like, we know. At this point, we don't need an explanation on what we did wrong. We're here showing you what not to do, right? We're showing you how, we're trying to educate. We don't need education from you back on how it's going to turn out. We know that.
I was called a lot of names, huh?
Yeah.
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 But again, you flash forward 35 years, and we're now in an environment where people are starting to look at events like what happened here. And they won't necessarily say, well, look at what they did wrong. They're getting more into, well, how did their decision making get them to that point? So when there's a new program that the U.S. Forest Service is teaching called Learning from Unintended Outcomes, and they walk you through these incidents, and where you think you're going to walk in and say, I'd have never done that. Once they lay out all the facts, I could have been that guy. I could very well have made the very same decisions, given the same information, the same time compressions, the same lack of communication, the same resistance, the same pushback, the same thrust from a supervisor that says no, that that very short no that tells you don't ask again.
Don't ask again.
And that I think again that helps us where we are today.
We talked about communications. Right, and you look at the communications here and stuff. And the HazMat huddle is a communications tool that gets everybody on the same sheet of music. And you look at any line of duty death investigation, and what's the number one thing they talk about? Where was the number one failure? It was communications.
And I think people miss what that communication is. It's not necessarily communication, it's how the messages are interpreted. That's because a lot of people think communication is I say something, you hear it.
Yeah.
And or the communication that broke, the radio didn't make the transmission. There was some interruption, as opposed to, well, I didn't really interpret what you said correctly, so I went off and went left when you told me to go right. Yeah. So I think those are all critical elements as well.
And something that I think too, though, is that if someone gives you an order that you might not agree with, you need to make sure that you need to push it, that you don't agree with it. And these are the reasons why. And you might want to edit that out, but I mean, that's what I feel today because of what happened here.
Sure.
And I go back over this, and you know, not every day or nothing, but I've been over this. Is like, I should have stood up and said, no, we're not doing that. That's hindsight.
Sure.
But to sit back and say, we're going to go cut on this flammable liquids tank with a abrasive saw blade, no, we're not doing that. Hey, maybe that gets into a lot of other stuff, but I mean, you know.
And again, too, like as these guys have kind of talked about, they didn't have the option of saying, he might have been able to say, no, let's not do that, but they didn't have the ability to say, this is a recovery. Like that didn't exist. Like something was going to get done on that scene, whether Tommy changed the way that it happened or not. They were going to move forward with a plan, and that's just part of the mindset and that aggressive style that was, again, it's hard to even call this HazMat at the time because it was was an aggressive fire department with the belief that they had a recovery, and they moved forward in the best way that they could to try to save somebody's life.
And again, our purpose here is to honor your father's loss, your family's loss, and your father's death, and let people know that that event that took place had a profound positive impact on the fire service overall. It was a great personal expense, there's no doubt, all the way across the board. But the fact that you're all sitting here today, I think one of the most unique elements of this particular podcast that we're going to have here is we have your dad's boss and then you as a captain doing the job, and the connection between you two is still very close. And it looks like there's a legacy that's been created there that shows that positive can come out of these types of things, and we do learn things. And the life that Captain Bates has had to live with has not been in vain, and there's good to come out of this.
Well, this is the instigator. This event was the instigator of all of the safety systems that we ended up standing up, right? The Car 957s, and then you leads into the FITs becoming safety officers. So all that stuff grew out of the beginnings of this event and Brett Tarver. Hey, one of the things that we that Chris got this close to saying is, right now in confined space, are they visible or are they viable? Can you see them? Can you hear them? If not, we're gonna operate in the recovery mode, right? If they're not visible and viable, we slow down.
But if you can't see them or can't hear them and you still believe that they're alive, you still treat that as a rescue though, right?
Yeah, we still treat it. We don't move into recovery mode. We don't call it a recovery. It's still a rescue, but we just slow down because they're not visible and they're not viable, and we know there's a really good chance they're going to be dead, right? We also know that the number one killer in confined spaces is atmosphere. Right. So ventilation is the only thing that's going to switch that, right? So establish ventilation. We're going to buy us time, right? So if atmosphere hasn't killed them before we get there, ventilation will sustain them until we get to them. In our hopes. Yeah.
Captain Bates, in closing, what advice would you give firefighters and everyone else that could be impacted by a line of duty death?
The advice that I would give to the officers and firefighters today is don't second guess what took place and support the men that were there. Don't come to conclusions realizing that they were doing the best that they could out there. You know, just like if you were out there and something happened, because you can't always control everything that happens. When you lose a firefighter, it's devastating. And guess what? It affected everybody on the Phoenix Fire Department. Everybody on the Phoenix Fire Department had a story of what they were doing, what truck they were on, and what they did on that particular call and how it affected them. And you don't always know what that is, you know what I mean? And you don't know the full story most of the time, and you're coming to conclusions about something that took place that might not be the truth. But if they are your brothers, and we're supposed to support each other. Me going back to work, that was my support. If I hear people talking about it and saying that I'm an idiot and we shouldn't have done this and we shouldn't have done that, well, you weren't there. You know, I have good friends that a lot of them didn't even ask me what took place, but they supported me. They could have come up with second opinions and that type of stuff, poured out. But with the FEMA thing or the 9/11 happened, I was driving Bob Gomez around. Hell of a fire captain. He was a chief officer at the time. We go to a place and we're getting ready to go on the FEMA deployment. But I'm driving around that day and I had to go to the drugstore. And he's getting some stuff and he's standing there. And this elderly woman at the drugstore and had a wig on, kind of cocked, and Bob was a big man. And she turns around and like it startled her that he was standing next to her, and she looked up and seen he was in uniform and said, "Oh, you're a fireman." And she goes, "Can I have a hug?" The rest of that day, every time I'd see somebody, I said, "Bob, you want to give him a hug?" It was a big joke at that point, you know. We went out to eat that night because we didn't really have a station. Went to a place and I got the waiter to ask Bob if she could have a hug, okay? But I needed a hug that night. Didn't get it. And that's what you need to do. You need to show some compassion to the people that were involved with that. And don't shun them off. Go talk to them and make them part of your crew. And I think that we lose sight of that because we don't know. I mean, you know, their side, if they have a reason for what they're doing and all that type of stuff, they don't always know what they're supposed to do either. But the person that's involved in something like this, they still want to be a part of the fire department. And I think that if we don't do that, maybe I would have left and found another job. You know? But I didn't, you know? But you might lose a lot of good people if you don't do that. You know? Talk about it. So that's kind of what I would ask people, I guess, to try to, and it doesn't, you know, stop by and see them at the station, you know, make them a part of what's going on, man. Don't, like I said, don't shun them off. Need a hug.
Yeah, we're all in this together, especially in times like these. After the fire, we'd like to thank Captain Bates, Captain Pearce, Chief Abbott, Chief Jamison, and Chief Tippett for such an engaging podcast. We also want to give a special shout out to the great Hamilton Keddy and the Phoenix Fire Department for allowing us to use their AV room. We could not have pulled this off without you guys. Thank you very much. Make sure to join us in episode 4, where we'll continue this conversation. We're going to dive into salient topics such as today's dangers of lithium-ion batteries and their storage facilities, something that Chief Abbott and the Surprise Fire Department have recently experienced. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and we'll see you after the fire.